Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all of you to the next chapter in the Concordia Exposition series on poverty. This series was specifically designed in order to take many social issues that exist around the world today and make them more known to students and the community around Concordia at large. In the past, we've tackled coal exports and human trafficking, and we will continue to explore many more topics throughout the future. But tonight, we focus on poverty. Before I continue, I'd like to thank all of you for coming, whether it's for extra credit or free food. However, you're still here, and that counts. But when we think of poverty, we often have a very negative, limited view of poverty, that it only exists within certain places, that it only exists within Africa or Asia or some parts of Latin America. But we often don't recognize that poverty, in many ways, it's like a virus, and it doesn't discriminate between a country or race or gender. It spreads everywhere in the United States, even, especially in Portland. It's a prevalent parasite, and it doesn't necessarily stop at a border or some arbitrary line that we have created. It exists within the forms of economic disparity, it exists in hunger, it exists in homelessness, and it is even created and spread by institutions to create a certain kind of poverty. Each of our speakers tonight is a professional within their field, and they're here not only just to share their experience and their stories, but also to share the work that they currently are a part of. And also to spread the word of the work they do, just in case anyone here is interested in going further with any of these causes. So tonight we have Bread for the World, we have Habitat for Humanity, and we have a former member of the Black Panther Party, Jamu. But before I hand over the microphone to our wonderful speakers tonight, just a couple quick reminders. If you're one of the couple people who already hasn't had any refreshments, I would do so, because it looks like we're about to run out in the next couple of minutes. If you have not signed in yet, I would do so now. Especially, remember to sign your professor's name in if you're here for extra credit, because that is what we'll be using to verify your presence. So if you've come here and you haven't signed your name or your professor's names on the sheet, then there's no verification that you actually were here at the event. Once again, thank you all for coming and being a part of this experience, and I hope that you'll continue to come to many of our incredible forums that are taking place next semester. Without any further ado, I hand over the mic to Ms. Stevenson from Bread for the World.
Hi, thank you guys for coming out. My name is Robin Stevenson. I work for an organization called Bread for the World. What I do for Bread is, I actually have two jobs there. I am our social media manager for a national organization, and I'm a community organizer working in 4 states on the West Coast. What Bread for the World is we're a network that works on ending hunger both here in the U.S. and abroad. And I'm going to focus tonight a little bit on what we do abroad, because I've been asked to speak to that. We are based in Washington, D.C., and we used to have, I think we have 5 now, satellite offices with organizers like me in the office who go out, and what we try to do is we try to get people to use their citizenship as a tool of change. We don't have boots on the ground. We don't have an agenda in terms of like we just work on water or something like that. So we basically follow anything that's going on in Congress during a year of legislation and look at things that will either increase or decrease hunger, and then we get citizen activists. So here in Oregon, some of you are probably voters in other states. Here in Oregon, you have Senator Merkley, Senator Wyden. In this area, I think that your representative is probably Blumenauer. So what we do is we have people write them letters, call them. Some of our members go in and have meetings with them. I just got back off the train yesterday from Montana. I have a group there that are going to, they gathered 90 petitions of 90 signers, and they're going to go have a meeting with Senator Baucus's office. So this is how we sort of make change. Because in DC, there are a lot of, you hear the term fat cats, the guys that powerful lobbyists. People who experience hunger and poverty don't have paid lobbyists that are out there for them. So it's nonprofit organizations that really need to speak up to change these laws. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about, your form here is, we work on ending hunger. Your form is about poverty, and poverty is a root cause of hunger. If you want to address hunger, you first have to address poverty. And poverty is somewhat complex. It's not always an easy fix. Like, one of the things I'm going to talk about is nutrition today, but you can't just fix nutrition somewhere but not think about the rest of the infrastructure, like education, like good jobs, and things like that. Poverty, these things are very, very interconnected, but the one thing that we know is that poverty is solvable. And we've made massive gains in global poverty over the last decade. So we don't want to see that go down. One of the things, and we learn more things, one of the things that we have learned in the last decade is about nutrition. Food aid. Right now, many of you that have been watching the news have been watching what's happening in the Philippines, and it's horrifying. A natural disaster happened. Many people have died, but one of the things you see most is people on the road going, we need help, we need food. The U.S. and many other countries will send food aid over there, and food aid in the U.S., our policies were created in the 1950s. Unfortunately, they haven't changed much since then, and they're not responding to today's global needs. So it's been a week out since the typhoon, and you still see people not getting aid in the Philippines right now. And some of that has to do with some reforms that we need to do. One of the things about how our policies around food aid right now are in a piece of legislation called the Farm Bill, and Congress is currently working on them. They're making some decisions about that in the next 2 weeks. And in the Farm Bill, about most of our food aid, 75% of it, has to come from U.S. commodities, be shipped on a merchant marine ship in the U.S., and travel all the way to that country. And there's a lot of problems with that. One, that's not really helping build the infrastructure of the country. And I'll give you an example, Haiti. In the 1988, Haiti produced 42 or 47% of their own rice, right? By the time the earthquake hit and devastated them, they were only producing 15% of rice. And that was because of tide aid. To decrease their loans, we said, okay, we'll decrease your loans in our policy as long as you buy and let us put our rice in your market. That really reduced the ability of local farmers to make a living, sent them into the city, and that increased poverty and therefore increased hunger. And so when disaster hit, they didn't have the capacity to really deal with it. And there was an earthquake about the same time in Chile, and Haiti still hasn't recovered, and it was a bigger earthquake, and they were fine because their government had the capacity to deal with that. We know now that just sending a monocrop somewhere and saying, okay, here's rice, we're going to flood, you need food, we're just going to give you rice. There was a Lancet study that came out in the last decade that looked at nutrition for children. Our food aid never really targeted nutrition. We were good about quantity, but not quality. And we know that from the time of pregnancy to 2 years old, that a child that is malnourished cannot recover from that. So that is the most important time to make sure children get nutrition. And if you have a country with widespread malnutrition, it will drop the GDP, the economic output of that country, by like 3%, and that's pretty huge. We started the lunch program here in the US because we couldn't get, in World War II, because we couldn't get enough soldiers that could pass the physicals because people were hungry. So programs like really targeting nutrition are extraordinarily important. We know this now, but our policy doesn't allow us to utilize that. And so what we're asking for in the Farm Bill right now is for them to just do a couple little reforms. All they need to do is lean a little. But there are vested interest in those in the shipping, in shipping these monocrops over there. So it really takes the voice of citizens to call their members of Congress, give them support, and say, we need to change policy. And it works. I've seen it work. I've worked at Bread for almost 6 years now. I've seen countless times where those vested interests seemed a lot louder. I've been on Capitol Hill walking around, and I see all the suits, but then I'm taking in, just people that look like you. You wouldn't know it, but you're a lobbyist when you speak up. And they listen to voters more than they do anything else, because one thing that politicians want is to get reelected. So the more you speak up and the more you speak out, the more you can really, really, really change the world. And so I'm going to go ahead and I think that's pretty much, I'll answer questions later if you have any, but we were supposed to keep it real short, so I'm going to pass.
Greetings, how's everybody? Good, because some of y'all don't look like you're too happy out there. So you should be happy. My name is Ajamu, and I have to correct one thing. I was 4 years old when the Black Panther Party was founded, so unfortunately I was never a member of the Black Panther Party. But I had the fortunate experience of working with many of them. I went to Cuba and spent time working with Assata Shakur there, who's on the FBI's most wanted list. A 65-year-old instructor is on the FBI's #1 terrorist list. That's interesting. And I lived in Guinea, West Africa, and lived in the house of Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael, who most certainly was a leading Black Panther. So I went to the breakfast program for the Black Panther Party. So I certainly am very much influenced and inspired by them. But I'm an organizer for an organization called the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And I know you've never heard of it because you would not hear about the All African People's Revolutionary Party on CNN or CIA or any of those networks. What we are is an independent, political, Pan-African revolutionary party based in Africa. We have chapters all over the African continent, in Europe, throughout this country, and since I've lived here a couple of years now, I'm starting a chapter here in Oregon, which means I'm recruiting and training members so that we can go out and do the work. What is that work? It speaks specifically to the question you're asking here about poverty, but before we do that, what I want to talk about, the brief time I have, is what poverty is, because if we don't know what it is, then we can't talk about how to resolve it. And I bet if we went around and asked everybody to define poverty, we'd get 100 different answers. So I'm going to try to confront that and make it easier so that we can have some working definition of what we're talking about here this evening. So poverty, I think, is a class phenomenon, all right? So that brings to the question, what is class? And again, if we asked everybody, we'd probably get 100 different answers about what class is. How many of you have heard the term upper class, middle class, lower class? Okay, throw that out. That's a bunch of nonsense, all right? Throw that out. There's no such thing as upper, middle, lower class. There is a class structure that exists, but that's another event for another time. But I would just like to give a working definition of what class is. Class is essentially two things, you all. It's the interests that you live your life for and represent, and it's your relationship to the means of production in this society. The means of production is the food that's produced, the water, the air, the electricity, all of the things that you and I need to function and develop as human beings. What is your relationship to that? Do you own it and control the production of it, or do you work for the people who own it and control the production of it? That's what class is. I know you never heard that because Professor Snodgrass doesn't talk to you about the definition of class. So you can say you came here and heard the angry black man tell you what class is, all right? So that's what class is. So what does class have to do with poverty? Well, there's a power structure in the class system that exists. You may not believe that because you've been taught it's a free market economy. I know, I understand it. I got a master's degree in economics. I've heard it my whole life. It's a free market economy, and all you have to do is have desire and determination, and you can rise to the top. That's what you've been taught. But what I would submit to you is that there is most certainly a power structure that you have to deal with. What is that power structure? For example, if any of you said tonight you want to manufacture automobiles, and you have billions of dollars, I would tell you right now, you're going to have a very difficult time achieving that objective, even though you have the money. Why is that? Because there are cartels. What are cartels? Who knows what cartels are? Anybody? What's a cartel?
It's a group that controls.
Right, say it louder.
A group that controls.
A group that controls. I know most of you are like, yeah, but you didn't know what it was till he said it. So that's good. A cartel is a group that controls. You hear the word all the time, drug cartels, but no one ever defines it for you. A cartel is an organization of people, different organizations, that come together to control, in the case of poverty, prices on products. That's what a cartel is. So the car manufacturing industry, for example, is a cartel. General Motors, Toyota, Ford, they get together and they meet you all. They sit down like we're sitting down here, and they determine the price of cars, even though you think they're competing against one another. So that's why they all produce similar line of cars, right? Toyota produces the Corolla, right? Nissan produces the, what was the Nissan has a, whatever it's called, the similar size cars, the Toyota. Honda has the Civic, right? And they agree what the general range for those prices of cars are. They all have the same type of trucks. They all have the same type of SUVs. It's a cartel. So if you're not a part of that cartel, you have to deal with them because they have relationships with the tire producing companies. They have relationships with the companies that produce zinc. They have that. So that's a power structure that has to be dealt with. And my point is, how did that power structure get to the point of controlling all that production? Is it because they were smarter than everyone else? Is it because they were more industrious, they worked harder? Is it because God blessed them better than everyone else was blessed? I don't think it was any of those things. It's because they were murderers, crooks, thieves, robbers, scurvy-carrying idiots who stole and built an empire and dominated the world's material and human resources. Oh my goodness, how dare you come here and say that? Well, I say it because I can prove it. And the way I can prove it is, how is this economy we live under here, how was it started? How is the banking industry in this society started today, in this world? What started banking in this world today? Anybody know? Anybody?
Bob.
Say it again?
Bob.
What's Bob?
Bob.
Oh, okay. Say more about it, so people know.
Like the Italian mafiosos back in the day, they had a monopoly on the banks.
That's a good guess, but that's not how banking started. You all are students, right? You got pens and pads out. You do research, you have research skills, right? Is that right or wrong? Some of you don't know, look like you're too sure, okay? All right, so you all are students. Research this. I want you to leave here today and say, that guy in that African shirt is just mad and I don't believe anything he's saying. So you research it for yourself because you're students. The banking industry in this society, in this world, started by buying and selling people that look like me. That's a fact. In fact, you can Google, you got 4G phones, you can Google it right now. Google Bank of America and slavery. Google Wachovia Bank and slavery. Google Mercantile Bank and slavery. Google Barclays and slavery. Google Lloyd's of London and slavery. And it all comes up. It's all out there. The information's there for you to see. You just got to do that dirty 4-letter word you got to read, okay? So that's how this industry got started. That's why I'm sitting here right now. That's why anyone that looks like me is sitting here right now. Because that's how this industry was built. That's how this society was built. And so in order to do that, they have to create a justification for that, the theft of those human and material resources. And that's why you have all the stigmas attached to people who don't have money, who are in a position where they might need help to function, to get through the day. That's why you have all these attitudes about people. You've heard it, like people who are on the street who don't have a place to live. What do people say? They're out there because they want to be out there. Who's heard that before? They're out there because they don't want to work. Some of you probably said that this morning. Some of your parents said that this evening. But I do a lot of work with houseless people here in Portland. And you're welcome to come out with me and work with them if you would like to. Now, don't get me wrong, because there's always a person out there that's anecdotal, and you'll leave out of here and say, he said everybody on the streets, none of them out there are out there because they want to be. Obviously, that would be absurd. But what I'm telling you is that there's a system in place that demands that people occupy certain positions. And a vast number of people who are on the streets have mental illness, have other issues that really prohibit them from functioning in a productive manner. I know this because, again, I work with them. And I invite you to come out, and I can introduce you to people, and you can see it, so you can get beyond the anecdotal thing of evaluating people you don't know anything about. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about in terms of poverty, is that it's not an individual initiative. People are not poor because they don't have initiative. They're not poor because they don't want to live better. Nobody is a child and says, you know, when I grow up, I want to not have a house to live in. When I grow up, I want to not have a job. When I grow up, I want to have nothing. I want to have no health care. That's my goal. That's what I want to do. That's not how that happens, you all. But there is a system in place. And I'll just close with this. I know this because not only do I study it and work with people and work against these issues, but I grew up from that perspective. I grew up in housing projects in first San Francisco, then Oakland, then LA, in Hunters Point, or what they call a point, or in South LA, or what you call, from you listen to that music, South Central. There is no such thing as South Central LA. That's a Hollywood production. It's South LA. Okay, so stop saying South Central LA. There's no such thing. So I know that from that, living in those communities and seeing the cycle that keeps people in that environment. And I could tell you all about what some of those obstacles are that keep you there, that are systematically put there. I'll just give you one quick example. When I was in LA, I was a young man. I was involved in gang life. When I was in that life, police would roll up to us all the time when we were sitting in our set. That's what we call them, sets. You listen to music, you know that. And they would say, hey, the guys that killed such and such, they're at the park down here. They're at Lemur Park. We'll give you 20 minutes to go down there and do what you got to do to deal with that. Now, I know a lot of you don't believe that because Uncle Sam's a cop and he would never do that. I get that. But again, all you got to do is go down there and you can see it. All you got to do is do the research and you can see what I'm telling you. And my point for that story is that the situation was designed to keep the whole thing going, to perpetuate it, keep it going. Because if you keep it going, now you've got a justification for more military supplies for the police. Now you've got a pipeline to the prison system, which, if you know anything about what's happening worldwide economically now, the entire outsourcing of jobs and giving them to prisons and companies making billions of dollars off of prison labor, that's the current aspect of what I talked about when I mentioned the banking structure and how it started and what that's about. And then the last thing is when I lived in Africa. I lived in 8 countries in Africa, and Guinea. Now, I know most people in the U.S. don't know anything about Guinea. Guinea's a country that's, if you look at a map, it's pretty much directly across the Atlantic Ocean from New York City. It's a country of 10 million people. The language is Malinke and Susu, and then French is the official language because that was the colonizing language. It's a country that has 60% of the world's bauxite reserves. Y'all know what bauxite is? Bauxite is what's used to make aluminum products. Okay, so if you use aluminum foil, you probably using something that was produced by workers in Guinea. It's a very mineral-rich country. They have gold, diamonds there, bauxite, they have all this stuff, but it's like the 3rd or 4th poorest country in the world. No electricity. When I lived there, no electricity, no water, no running water, dirt floors, people just living in abject poverty. I ate one meal every 1 or 2 or 3 days when I lived there. How is a country that's so rich have such poverty? Is it because the people there aren't, they're not industrious enough to try to figure it out? No, there are so many systematic things in place to maintain the system as it is there so that Alcoa, which is the aluminum company that produces aluminum there, can exploit those resources cheap and make products and become profitable off of them. So that's the driving force behind poverty in Guinea. And it's that same system that's the driving force behind poverty in San Francisco and Oakland and LA and everywhere else as well. And that's what I want to leave you with. I know it's a lot, and I know probably a lot of it passed over, but that's good for you because then you should have questions and we can talk about it further. But just remember that one point, that the system you have here, the fact that everybody in here looks relatively fed, relatively comfortable, we're all pretty much healthy, This is based on a system that exploits and oppresses the majority of people on the planet today.
So, hi, my name is Tiffany. I'm the president of our Habitat for Humanity chapter on campus. So basically, the vision for Habitat is a world where everyone has a decent place to live. Their mission statement is seeking to put God's love into action. Habitat for Humanity brings people together to build homes, communities, and hope. And I think one really important part of that is not only building homes, but also communities and hope. In Portland right now on Southeast 171st and Division is where they have the largest build site in Oregon. It has 45 homes. It's going to bring a stable home to about 150 children. Within that build site, they have a community garden because they know that people who own their homes instead of rent them are going to be more involved in their community. They're going to care more. They're going to build that community garden and build a community amongst everyone that lives there. So a couple of statistics that I found. So in the U.S., there are 48.5 million people who are living in poverty at this moment. Many of these people who have unaffordable housing, they have one move every 15 months. And this is really hard for families, especially those who have children. It lowers math scores, reading scores, it increases behavior problems. But families who have been able to gain a home through the 0% interest loan that Habitat does, and after their 500 hours of sweat equity, and basically the sweat equity is they have to work on not only the home that they will be given, but also the homes that other people are given. They have to do at least 500 hours of community service on those homes. It has increased math scores by 9%, reading scores by 7%, and has decreased behavior problems by 3%. And so by 2020, if there's not an investment in the poverty problem, there will be an estimated 1 billion people who are going to be living in slums. And in the first time since the Depression, the 2010 census has showed that there's been a lower home ownership rate. But yeah, so that's the first time since the Depression that there's been a decrease in home ownership rate instead of an increase. So since 1976, which is when Habitat for Humanity was founded by Millard and Linda Fuller, 3 million people have been served through the Better Housing Solutions. And just a little backstory on Linda and or Mr. and Mrs. Fuller. So he was able to start a big company, and by the time that he was 29, he was a millionaire. But then him and his wife decided that they needed to focus their life a little bit more, and so they sold everything that they had and gave it to people who were less fortunate, and then started the Habitat for Humanity International. And so just in 2012 alone, 94,618 families have been served, and Habitat surpassed its milestone of 600,000 homes, and it's continuing to build. And so Habitat for Humanity, a lot of people think that it's only in the United States, but they are actually in every state, but they are also in 100 other countries throughout the world. And one of the most important things about Habitat is that it's a hand up and not a handout, because people do have to be able to make an initial payment and be able to pay for the mortgage payments. But with Habitat, they are able to lower the normal payments that someone would pay for rent, so that people have a place to live. And so the process that a lot of families have to go through is they go through an application process, and part of it is a home visit. And if any of you know Kim Clutter, who works in our Office of Service Leadership, she was a part of the home selection committee last year. And one of the more heartbreaking stories that she was able to share with me was that on one of the home visits, they always ask, what would a new home mean to you? What would someplace that you could call your own mean? And one girl said, well, it would mean that I wouldn't have to always be cold. I'm just tired of being cold. I'd like to be warm. And so a lot of these families are living in, all of these families are living in subpar housing. Some of them have to deal with mold and with other things that are within the buildings, but that the managers don't always take care of. And so for someone to just not want to be cold, I think that's one thing that we all take for granted. Because, I mean, raise your hand if right now you're super cold. Okay, well, a couple of you. But to have that on a daily basis and for your one hope to just not be cold. So Habitat, I guess one last thing that I'll say is that, so it focuses on the families, the children, and the community. So for the families, it gives them a chance to have stability, build equity, and have something tangible to pass on so that when they pass on, they can actually give their children a home. For children, it raises their self-esteem. It makes them actually be hopeful. It helps them be better in school, safer and healthier. And it improves the community because homeowners are more active. They pay into the local taxes that will help that community. They have better physical home environments and increased safety, better schools, better provision of local public services, increased house prices, increased attention to local environmental concerns, and just overall creates more care and concern in the community.